begin. But first, what I'll do is I'll try to repeat the argument about the counting that we gave last time, because some of you still had some confusion later. So this is the problem that we want to show that how many components can we set to 0. How many components, take for example the first derivative of the metric. How many components can we set to 0 by adjusting this coefficient that we have. And so let me outline the kind of questions that might have confused you. So we consider the counting problem. So we used a coordinate transformation of the following form. We are interested in studying the coordinate transformation near the point x0, and so we chose a general coordinate transformation on x prime g minus x prime g naught plus vi j k. And the question was whether we can use such coordinate transformations to set this equal to 0 or del I del j g j k 0. And what we showed is that if we just count the number of parameters, then there are enough number of parameters b and k that can be used to set del I g j k equal to 0, okay, at a given point x0. But there is not enough parameter in c I j k that can be used to set this equal to 0. But in that counting, we ignored the fact that we also have these aij's. Okay, as we saw that these aij's can be used to make gij equal to in the standard form, where it's diagonal with diagonal values plus or minus 1. But you still have some more freedom left in aij in the form of Lorentz transformation or rotation. The question is, even if we cannot use the Cij c's to set this to 0, would you have used the a's? Okay, because you didn't count a in carrying out this analysis. So what I try to argue today, okay, I indicated it briefly last time, but let me go through it in more detail, that a's do not help us in setting the tensors to 0. Okay, and we will make this more precise exactly what we mean. So let's suppose that we have some tensor which are trying to set to 0, okay, by coordinate transformation. Because if we can set that tensor to 0, that means the tensor must vanish, right? Because if the tensor is 0 in one coordinate system, it's 0 in all coordinate systems. So you want to prove that some hypothetical tensor that we might construct out of these, we want to set to 0. Now let's assume, for the sake of argument, that we have found some coordinate transformation which have managed to set the tensor to 0. Okay. So let's imagine that we have some tensor ci1 to in. Okay, we will not make any commitment about the rank of the tensor right now. Okay, I take everything lower. Okay, but that's also not necessary. So let's suppose we have a tensor ci1 to in, and suppose that we have managed to make this equal to 0 in some frame. With some choices of A's and B's. Okay. So now we start with this frame, okay, and make a further change of coordinates. We make a further change of coordinates, which is of the following: from x prime I is equal to x prime I plus S I J X double prime J minus X double prime J. Okay. You don't do anything else. Okay, we just stop here. We just make a change of coordinate which is linear. Okay, they are not quadratic or higher order. So we have a choice of making any coordinate transformation that we like. So the first thing to notice is that C double prime, the original tensor in this new frame will also be 0. Okay, that's here I1 to In. So this will be X double prime I1 of X prime J1. Okay. X prime Jn, C prime J1 to Jn. Okay, so these are nothing but Si1 J1 to Sin Jn, C prime J1 to Jn. But the main point is that because we have already assumed that this has been set to 0, this is 0. Okay, so in the double prime frame also we set all the tensor components to 0. Okay, so if you can do it in prime frame, it's also true in double prime frame. But now let's look at the relationship between the original coordinates xi and these double prime coordinates, okay, which are defined here. This is not hard to figure out because after all the original coordinate xi is given in terms of prime coordinates in this equation. All you have to do is that you have to substitute the prime coordinates in terms of the double prime coordinates. So the relationship between xi and x double prime will have the following form: xi naught plus ai j s j k plus higher order terms, which should not worry about right now. Okay? Say x prime j minus x prime j naught from here. X prime j minus x prime j naught will be s j k x double prime k minus x double prime k naught, and then there are higher order terms. Okay, here there are no higher order terms, but here, for example, it's quadratic in x prime j minus x prime j naught. Right? So when you substitute this, it will become quadratic in x double prime j minus x double prime j naught. Okay, which we put in this terms.
So aij times xi naught prime xi naught.
Yeah, xi prime x prime I naught minus x prime I naught is Sij times this, right? That's what I have used here. Okay? So this quantity I can write as some a tilde ik. So this then has the form of xi naught plus a tilde ik x double prime k minus x double prime k naught plus but now you notice, and okay, I should have said something else also, that this transformation, this is true for C's, of course. Okay, C is a tensor, then of course it is true. Okay. But this is more general. As long as you only consider linear transformations, okay, it's also true, for example, of del I GJK. Okay, if you have del I GJK, that's not a tensor in general. Okay. But under a linear transformation of this kind, del I GJK also transforms as a tensor. Okay, so or del I del GJK also transforms as a tensor. So if you have set this equal to 0 in one frame, in the prime frame it will remain 0 in the double prime frame. Okay, and so now we see that S is completely arbitrary. S is up to us to choose. Okay, and we can in principle choose S to be inverse of the matrix A. Okay, we can choose, if you choose S equal to A inverse, then A tilde ik will just be delta I. This is just one example. You can choose S to be anything that we like, and using that we can make A tilde to anything that we like. Is this point clear? So what this says is that if we can make these 0 in some frame, okay, with some choice of coordinate transformation, then we can all make this 0 with another choice of coordinate transformation for which the linear term is anything that we like. Okay, it can be just delta ik. Okay. So if we are asking the question, is there a coordinate system in which these two things vanish, these things vanish, okay, we can restrict ourselves to coordinate transformations for which this term, the first term, is just delta I. Is this clear? So this means that we can, that if we are able, that if it is possible to set these things to 0, we should be able to set these things to 0 without using A. Okay, and that is the reason why you don't have to include A in the counting, because whether you can make this happen or not is independent of what A we choose. Okay, because if you can make this happen, you can also make this happen with A equal to identity. Okay. This is the reason why on the first time when we counted whether this can be set to 0, okay, then we used only the b's. Right? And we found the number of b's is exactly the right number to be able to set this equal to 0. Then we wanted to see if we can set both of these to 0. Okay. See, setting just this to 0 without setting this to 0 doesn't help, because that can be a tensor which involves a combination of this and this. Right? In which case setting this to 0 doesn't make the tensor vanish, because it could get non-zero contribution from here. Riemann tensor is such an object, right? Riemann tensor contains second derivative of the metric but also first derivative, right? It involves a gamma square term, gamma term. Okay. So if you want to prove, for example, that Riemann tensor is identically 0, that there is nothing like Riemann tensor, we have to be able to find a coordinate system in which both of these are set to 0. Setting this to 0 uses up all the b's. And then what we found is that setting this to 0 is not possible because we simply don't have enough number of parameters that can set this to 0. Okay, because this one has n into n plus 1 by 2 square parameters, right? Because this is symmetric in ij, that gives you n into n plus 1 by 2, and this is symmetric in ij, that gives you n into n plus 1 by 2. So these many conditions, if we have to set all of them to 0, we need these many conditions. Whereas C, I, J, K, L, okay, this has n times n into n plus 1 times n plus 2 over 6 parameters. Okay, these we have already used in setting this equal to 0, so these are not very useful now. And we see that this is less than this, and that's why you cannot make all of these components vanish. If on the other hand we impose some additional equations, additional conditions on this, okay, if we don't make this to be arbitrary but impose some additional conditions. How many conditions? This minus this. Then we can make this vanish, right? Because those conditions will set some of the combinations to 0, and then the rest you set to 0 by using this. So the number of things that you have to set to 0 by hand, okay, that you have to demand that it is 0, is this difference. And that is precisely the number of independent components of a Riemann tensor. Right? Because if you set all the components of a Riemann tensor to 0, then you know the tensor is identically 0. Right? Once you have set them to 0 in one frame, it remains 0 in another frame. Okay, so this is the reason that this way you can actually count how many independent components a tensor should have. Okay, of course you can count also by direct analysis, right? By counting how many independent components you have using the various symmetries. But even without doing it, just this counting tells us from the beginning how many independent components we expect. Okay, because the number of independent components of the Riemann tensor would be the number of additional conditions that you have to impose in order to be able to make both of them 0. Is this logic clear?
So when we were trying to arrive at the Riemann tensor, we were trying to achieve some kind of tensor which remains invariant over coordinate transformations, so that we know that we are dealing
Yeah,
with the
which
same
remains
thing.
covariant. Yeah.
So we studied that Riemann tensor is a possible solution for this. How do we know that it is an invariant tensor?
Because once you have written the Riemann tensor as a combination of G's,
Hmm.
G's you know how it transforms,
Hmm.
right? Then you can explicitly check how the Riemann tensor transforms,
Okay.
and then you find that transforms as a tensor, right? That I didn't do it explicitly, but that's something you can check.
No, we can check it that it transforms as tensor, but
Yes.
how do we know it remains invariant over coordinate transformations?
Well, it doesn't remain invariant under tens by definition. Okay, if it transforms as a tensor,
Hmm.
right, that means it gets multiplied by this del xi prime del xi terms, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the statement. It doesn't remain invariant.
So, what invariant quantity did we arrive at while we were doing all of this?
Okay, if you want invariant quantity, then Ricci tensor, for example, is invariant.
Okay.
That's a scalar because you have contract to the metric. Then you can take this combination R I J K L R M N P Q, and then we take G I M G J N G K P G L K. Yeah, this is also invariant. This is also scalar, right? Because it's all indices are
All indices.
contract. So once you have a tensor, you can construct many scalars by taking polynomials and contracting.
It's dependent on the space time
Yeah,
dimension
but-
as well.
Yeah, but upon if you want to distinguish, for example, flat space from non-flat space, right? Just knowing the Riemann tensor is enough. If the Riemann tensor is non-zero, right, for a given space, we know that it cannot be transformed into flat space by a coordinate transformation because flat space has zero Riemann tensor. If on the other hand you are trying to compare two different curved spaces, whether they can be transformed into each other by coordinate transformation, then it's useful to look at scalars like this. Right? You calculate scalars of this form and then you compare between these two manifolds and see whether they are the same or not.
So, is there a limit to the number of scalars that we should compare, or is there infinite?
The point is Riemann tensor has 20 independent components in 4 dimensions.
So,
right?
20 different.
So at
scalars.
most 20 different scalars you can construct.
Four dimension. Four space.
4 dimensions, yeah. Otherwise,
For 3 dimensions.
yeah,
six.
this difference, right?
Mhm.
As long as you have found those many independent scalars, you know there cannot be anything more than that. Okay, so yesterday or last time we started discussing the notion of covariant derivative. So let me remind you again what the issue was. So what we have to suppose you have a tensor AI. Okay, covariant vector rank 0 1 tensor AI. Then what we saw is that this object is not a tensor. Okay, it's not a tensor because when you look at its transformation property, you get some additional terms in this transformation property. So this is not a tensor. But we found that we can construct a related object which we call DIAJ, which we defined as the usual derivative minus gamma I j k ak. This object transforms as a tensor. Okay, the extra term that you get from this transformation law cancels precisely the extra term that you get from the gamma ij transformation. So this is the tensor. I also said that this object, okay, if you take, suppose you are a contravariant vector, again we consider this is not a tensor. However, if we consider EIAJ, which by definition was the usual derivative plus gamma j ik ak, this is the tensor. This is rank 1 tensor. Okay, we didn't do this analysis explicitly, but you can check by doing this analysis explicitly that indeed this transforms as a tensor. So this was left as an exercise. So given these two, we can now generalize this notion to an arbitrary tensor, covariant derivative of an arbitrary tensor. So let's suppose that we have a tensor of rank PQ, AI1 to IP, J1 to JQ. And we take the ordinary derivative of this. It's easy to see that this is not a tensor. However, there is a notion of covariant derivative just by generalizing these two. Okay, so let me write this generalization and then I'll try to explain the rules that one has to follow. So first we have the ordinary derivative. Then the idea is that for each of these indices, we have to add a gamma factor like this. If the indices are on top, the gamma factor comes with plus sign. If the indices are below, it comes with the minus sign. And then the arrangement of indices, okay, will follow automatically because you have to match the upper and lower indices. Okay, so let me write the expression and then it will become clear. So you think of this when you try to see what are the extra terms you have to add. Think of this as a product of P different contravariant vectors and Q different covariant vectors. Okay, and apply the covariant derivative one by one. So the first term will be of the following form: gamma k L I1. So it's acting on I1 first. Then you write A. You see the I1 appears here, so you have taken out I1. So you replace I1 by whatever index comes here, L. Then rest of the index you keep as it is. So this is the first term. Second term will be gamma I2 KL, and here now we will have A. The first one will be I1, second one will be L, then I3 up to I3, J1 up to J2. And it goes on like this. The last term in this series will be gamma IP KL, then A I1 to I minus 1 A J1 to JQ. So is this rule clear? Right? So you apply one by one. Okay, take each index and you covariantize it by using this gamma. And then you have to do it for the lower indices. Okay, but this time you will have minus. So minus gamma k j1l I1 to IP L j2 to jq minus gamma j2 L I1 to IP j1 L j3 jq and the last term minus gamma L k j2 And the idea is that once you have shown these two, okay, that this is a tensor and this is a tensor, it's more or less straightforward to check that this also transforms as a tensor. So dk in I1 to IP J1 to JQ is a rank E Q plus 1. Okay, so I'll leave it as an exercise. And the general idea is the following, that you have in the transformation law of this, you have lots of factors of del x prime, del x or del x prime. Okay? In fact, p plus q factors. When you apply this derivative, then this derivative acts separately on each of those q factors, p plus q factors, right? And gives some extra term, which you don't want because tensor transformation properties do not involve second derivatives. So those extra terms have to be cancelled. And one by one they can get cancelled by this p plus q extra terms that come from the p plus q gammas. Okay, that's the way you prove that this transforms as a tensor. Is this clear? Is this okay?
Sir, why there q plus 1 then? I mean,
Because
q plus 1.
there is q already and then the one more index has come.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why it's q plus 1. So because that derivative always acts on as a lower index, right, you always increase the second index. Right? For example, this here you start with rank 01 and you get rank 02. Right? Here you start with rank 10 and you got rank 11. So it always increases the rank.
Now it is a tensor, so you can use upper index also.
Yes, you can use upper index, for which you have to raise it by multiplying by g. Okay? Because given a tensor, we saw that product of two tensors is also a tensor. And contraction also preserve the tensorial property. So you could, so maybe I can discuss this now itself, raising and lowering. That you had seen that if we take, for example, a tensor of the form A I1 IP J1 to J2 and B M1 to MR M1 to MS. This one, if we write this as C I1 to IP M1 to MR J1 to J2 M1 to MS. So this is rank Q plus R Q plus S tensor. And this is what you had said earlier, the proof of this is straightforward, right? Because this gives you a set of factors, this gives you a set of factors, and the transformation of this precisely is needed these all those set of factors. So this is one statement that this is a tensor, the tensor is a tensor. The other statement that we had to prove is that if we have a tensor like this, I1 to IP, J1 to JQ, okay, this is a tensor, this is rank PQ tensor. Then C I1 I2 to IP and I1 J2 to JQ. Here I1 index is contracted and sub. So this we had said is a rank P minus 1, Q minus 1 tensor. Okay, again the proof is straightforward. So now if we have a tensor like A I1 to A J1 to JQ, G say I1 I2, this object is 2Q tensor, right? Now I1 and J1, I1 is an upper index, J1 is a lower index. So you can set I1 equal to J1 and sum. Okay, so we perform the second operation. Set I1 equal to J1 and sum. So A I1 J2 to JQ, B I1 I2. This will be a rank 1 Q minus 1 tensor. Clear? Right? Because we are making use of these two relations over here. Right? One is that the product of two tensors generates a tensor. Okay, just ranks as that. And the second relation is that the contraction between an upper and lower index reduces the rank by 1 1. Okay, takes it from PQ to P minus 1 Q minus 1. So we first took this multiplied by G I1 I2 to make it into a 2Q tensor, and then we contract it to make it into 1Q minus 1 tensor. So this is normally denoted by the same symbol A, but with index I2 above and J2 to JQ.
One thing,
Yes.
why
Why is it shifted this side? Because it's like you have a index J1 here, that's what you are raising. So since J1 was the extreme left,
that got contracted?
yeah, so that is this J1 is gotten contracted, right? So it's useful to write this. The position, so if you are raising an index or lowering an index, you don't change the position. So effectively what are you doing? You are raising the index of I1 by multiplying by this G and contracting. Okay? So because this is the index that you are raising, right? We write the upper index also to the extreme left. Is this point clear? Yeah, this is just a convention, right? If the tensor is symmetric, then of course it doesn't matter how you write it.
But in case of antisymmetric tensors, this can matter.
Yeah, or the tensor may not have any symmetry at all.
In that case,
In which case it does matter which one you are raising.
yes.
So for example, let me,
Basically, transpose means the alternation of these indices. When we take transpose of some like 1-1 matrix,
yeah,
1-1 tensor, we can always represent a 1-1 tensor as a matrix. In that case,
yeah,
if we
but in
interchange
general
it,
of course the tensor may not be representable as a matrix, right?
Yeah,
So it's always
in general
useful to
it's
think in terms of the index, right? That the position of the index makes a difference. Okay, so for example, let's take another A J1 to JQ, and suppose you multiply by G I2 G I1 I2, okay, and then set I1 equal to J2 and sum. Okay, so you go from here to A, J1, I1, J3, J2, and G, I1, I2. Right? They are just contracting not J1. Earlier we had contracted J1, but now we are saying that let's say J2 equal to I1 and sum. So this we will write as A, J1, I2, J3 to J2. Okay, that's to indicate that is the second index of A that we have raised. Okay, if we use this convention, then there is no possibility of confusion, right, as to which index has gotten raised and lowered. So often then we will raise and lower index, but this is what we mean. Right? When we write the tensor, and suppose we take a Riemann tensor, right, and we raise the index.
Yes.
Okay, that basically means this, that you take multiply by the metric and contract appropriate index.
Like we have refined the Ricci tensor as a contraction of first and third index.
Yes, exactly.
It's not first and second index. It's
Yeah,
not
first and second index of course you cannot contract because that's antisymmetric.
Yes.
Okay. So Riemann tensor, if I remind you, right, this was defined in terms of the gammas and the derivatives. Then we define R IJKL as G IM RM JKL. Sorry,
I will be
GIM RMJKL. Because this is defined. This is defined to begin with, right? With one, the first index up, all other out. So because we are lowering the first index, okay, this index has written as the first index, RIJKL. Okay, so this is the convention that will be following.
So when indices are antisymmetric,
Yes,
then we cannot contract, meaning the contraction will result into zero.
that's right, exactly. If, for example, here now if you multiply by GIJ RIJK, okay, this is two contractions. Okay, this is supposed to be, so G, if these indices are free, right, this would have been a rank 2-4 tensor. Okay, 2 upper index, 4 lower index. You have made two contractions, right? So it becomes rank 0 to tensor. Okay, it has only 2 lower index or no upper index. But this would have been a rank 0 to tensor except that this is 0 identically, right? Because this is antisymmetric in Ij, this is symmetric in Ij. So when you sum over I and j, it gives you 0. Okay, so while this is 2, it's a tensor. It's a trivial tensor because it's 0. Right? Okay, that's why the Ricci tensor is obtained by contracting I and k. Okay, multiply by g, I, k and sum. Or you can do it here, you just contract I and k, okay, which is the same thing. So when you write the same symbol, but write the index upper and lower, okay, that basically amounts to contraction of this kind. Okay, the raising and lowering index basically amounts to contraction of this kind. Another notion which is sometimes useful is the identity tensor. Let me explain what it is. Delta IK. So this is the Kronecker delta or Kronecker symbol. Delta IK by definition is 1 if I is equal to k, 0 if I is not equal to k. So this is equal to 1 if I is equal to k, 0 Y is not equal to 0. Now, first of all, this looks a little strange because so far you have introduced tensors which are obtained from metric and its derivatives. Okay. This doesn't contain the metric or its derivative. But a constant function is still a function. Right? Tensors are supposed to be functions of the metric and its derivative. Right? This happens to be a constant function, it doesn't depend on the metric at all. Okay? So, it is a special case of some function of the metric. Okay, so that the fact that it doesn't depend on the metric, that of course is not necessarily makes it not a tensor. But in order to prove that this is a tensor, we have to make sure that if you take the tensor delta ik, if the tensor takes a value delta ik in one frame, it better be that when you change frame, when you go to a different coordinate system, it still takes a value delta ik. And only then you can declare this to be a tensor. Okay. Otherwise, saying that delta ik is a tensor doesn't make sense, right? Because it can be delta ik in one frame, but in a different frame it might have a different value. So let's check what happens. That suppose you have taken this to be delta ik in some x coordinate system, and you want to see how it looks in the y coordinates, in the x prime coordinate system. So this is x coordinate. So in the x prime coordinate, we don't know whether it will still look like delta ik. So let's call it delta prime ik.
Since it is a constant, hence it should remain constant. Since
Well,
it is a constant,
yes, that is true. On the other hand, the tensors have the transformation laws, right? So the tensor in this tensor in the new frame should be given by its transformation law. Right? We cannot demand that it will remain constant. Okay. So let's see what it becomes. Okay? Delta prime ik. So delta prime ik by definition is del m x prime I del prime k x m of delta mn.
So we are assuming it to be tensor.
Yes, exactly. Right? We are assuming it to be tensor, but we are not assuming that in the prime frame it is the same as delta ik. Right? We are trying to see what it becomes in the prime frame.
I mean, we already know it is a tensor.
Well, you don't. We have.
I mean, it is multiplication of 2g.
Okay. Yeah, but that's meaning that okay. Using that, we can show that the g upper mu is mn is a tensor. Right? We have not proven that g upper mn is a tensor. Right? That is something you have to prove. So it depends on what you want to prove first. Okay. So this one. So this is what have I done? We have said that let's assume that there is some frame in which the tensor takes a form delta ik, Kronecker tensor. Now we don't declare how it looks in the other frame. Let's see how it looks in the other frame. Okay. So that by definition is delta prime ik. Okay. But what you know is that this should be determined by the tensor transformation laws. Okay. So this is the tensor transformation law. Because it's delta m, and this of course is the usual Kronecker delta, right? This is the delta in the original frame. Okay, where you have taken it to be Kronecker delta. So this I can write as del m x prime I and del prime k of xm. But now you see that you can use chain rule. Del prime k of xm, del m of x prime I. Right? So this is del prime k of x prime I, which is delta ik. Right? Because this is del x k prime of x prime I, right? Which is delta ik. Because x prime is the same coordinate system, right? You are taking derivative of x prime I with respect to x prime k, they are independent coordinates. So what this shows that indeed this is a tensor, right? That in all frames it preserves this from delta ik. Okay, which is sometimes useful as we'll see. Okay. But typically what you can do with this, you can also achieve the same thing by g. Okay, you have to just prove that g upper mn is tensor, right? Which also you can prove. It's not very hard.
In general, any indexed quantity which is constant in some frame, can you always argue it to be a tensor?
No, if we take delta ik, suppose you have a tensor with the form which is delta ik in some frame. okay, which is Kronecker delta still, but both index to 1. Now if you go to a different frame, it will take a different form. Right? So it will not remain constant. So it's only this. So this one is a tensor, this one is not. Okay, that if you declare that we have something which takes the form delta ik in all frames, then its transformation law is not that of a tensor. Okay, Gik is a tensor of course, but not delta ik.
So in case of this delta ik11, we are actually showing that our assumption of it being a tensor remains consistent with our definition.
Exactly, yeah. That if we take some tensor which takes the form delta ik in some frame, then it takes the form delta ik in all frames. And that's what we showed, right? Delta prime ik is the same as delta ik, so it preserves its form.
But its tensorial properties is something we have assumed.
That's, well, by when you say that you construct a tensor which is delta ik in some frame, then when you have declared it's a tensor,
Yes.
we have assumed that is our input.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
What we have not assumed is that it takes the same form in all frames, and that is something we proved here. Right? That if we take it to be delta ik in one frame, right, and that if it's a tensor, then it takes the form delta ik in all frames. But exactly a similar statement doesn't hold for delta or lower. Right? Suppose you have a rank 0 to tensor which takes the form of Kronecker delta in some frame. Right? There can certainly be tensors which satisfy that property. But
That does
then
not-
when you go to a different frame, it doesn't preserve the same form.
And if we assume that some index quantity preserves the same form like 0 to quantity, 2 index down, that preserves the same form in different frame, then that will not follow a tensor like property.
Exactly, that's it. Okay. So now we'll discuss some properties of the covariant derivative which will be useful. So let's consider, suppose we have two tensors A and B, and now we consider C I1 to IP, P1 to PR, J1 to GQ, L1 to LS. So this is by definition the product of A I1 to IP, J1 to JQ, and B J1 to PR, J1 to LS. So this is a rank P plus R, Q plus S tensor.
So delta ij at lower indices will not be a form preserving tensor. It will
Yes, so it
transform
can. So that means that there can be tensor which takes the form delta ij in some frame, but in another frame it will not take the same form. Yes, exactly. Whereas a tensor which takes the form delta ik in one frame will continue to take the form delta ik in all frames.
But that will be tensor, sir. Delta ik both lower.
No, that it will not be a tensor.
Yes, sir. But while proving this statement, last line we see that we define delta ik as del k xi, and then from there we can prove that it will be a tensor.
No, delta ik. Let's look at this. Delta prime ik
Yes.
will be del prime I x m del prime k x n of delta mn, right?
Yes.
So assume that in the unprimed frame it's delta mn. But this is not delta ik. This quantity is not delta ik. Right? Because this is del prime I xm del prime k xm. Yeah, this has no simple property. So delta prime ik will be a complicated function of x in general.
Yes, sir. But while writing that last line,
Here.
yes, sir.
Yes.
In any coordinate, I can define delta I upper and delta k lower.
Yes. So as long as you think of this delta I as a rank 1 tensor,
Yes, sir.
right? Then it will preserve its form. In any frame, it will preserve the form delta I. Right? But if you have a rank 0 tensor,
Yes, sir.
which takes the form delta I in one frame, it will not take the same form delta I in
Yes,
another.
it will not preserve its form.
Exactly.
But will it be tensor?
Yes, then you will not say the delta I is a tensor, right? Because it takes the delta I form only in a very specific frame, right?
Yes, sir.
So you will not say the delta I is a tensor, you will say there is some tensor which may take a value delta I under special circumstances in some frame. Right? That's certainly possible. But when you say that delta I is a tensor, that means that there is a tensor of rank 1 which takes the form delta I in all frames. Okay, so this is the distinction between these two.
We can think in this fashion that if we write down a fact metric for a Euclidean case, it is delta ik downstairs.
Yes.
But with the case transformation, it can change to other forms.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if
So
you
that's
go
a
to
specific example of this
if you
delta
go to
ik
the
downstairs.
polar coordinate, for example, right, the delta ik, we both index down, that was the form of the Euclidean metric in the Cartesian coordinates. And polar coordinates it will be different. Okay. So this is a rank p plus r q plus s tensor. Okay, that's clear, right? Let's just take the product of two tensors. So since this is a rank p plus r q plus s tensor, we can define dk of C I1 to IP, K1 to KR, J1 to JQ, L1 to Ds. Because you have already defined covariant derivative, right? There are lots of gammas coming in here. And the claim is, okay, which is reasonably straightforward to prove, that this is given by sum of two terms, dk of A I1 to IP, J1 to JQ, plus plus okay, this is what is called the distributive property of covariant derivative. Ordinary derivative, of course, it would have been true. Okay? The part of dk that has the answer is the ordinary del del k, del del x. But this obviously this is true, right? Del del xk of A times B and A times del del k. The additional input here is that the gamma factors are such that the net set of gamma factors that we get from here are given by the sum of the gamma factors that we get from here, right? The ones that we get from here. Okay, which again is reasonably straightforward if you just follow the gammas that appear in this covariant derivative. Is this okay? Okay, now another important property, di gjk. So this is a tensor, right? Covariant derivative of tensor. On the other hand, there is something strange about it, because if you write it in terms of the ordinary derivative of the gammas, okay, gammas involve first derivatives of g. So this quantity is constructed out of only the first derivatives of g. Okay, this is for del I GJK plus minus gamma IJ L GLK minus gamma IK LG. Right? That follows from the definition. Gammas are constructed out of first derivative symmetry. But we have already proved that it's impossible to find a tensor out of first derivative symmetry. Right? On the other hand, you know that this is a tensor. Okay, so how can you reconcile the two? Okay, but of course you can check this explicitly. So I'll leave it as an exercise to check this explicitly. Gammas I have defined already, right? Okay, so using the definition of the gammas, you can check that indeed this is identical to 0. Okay, but we know that it should be identical to 0 because of this fact. Similarly, DIGJK, this is also 0. Okay, and for this, of course, you have to do the earlier step. The GJK is a rank 2 0 tensor. GJK is rank 2 0 tensor. Okay, this you can prove. Then I will do an exercise. We define GJK as the inverse of G. Okay, so that is an independent definition. Now G we know how it transforms. So inverse of G we know how it transforms, right? So using that we have to show that this actually transforms as a rank 2 0 tensor. Is this statement clear? Right? Rank 2 0 tensor has certain factors, right, by which it transforms. And you basically have to start from the transformation law of G with lower index, and starting from that you have to find the transformation law of G of upper index and then prove this.
We can just take del I of delta IK and then prove it.
Yeah, G times G, yeah, that's another thing. This G I K, G J I, G K I, K J, this delta I. Well, it's not really a proof because we have not gone the other way, right? We know that if this is a tensor, then the contraction is a tensor, but not that if this is a tensor, then this has to be a tensor. But I mean, we can use that also to give this proof. Okay. So if this is a tensor, right? So it better be a tensor, right? Without, if this was not a tensor, then we'll get some additional transformation law here, which will not match up.
There is a theorem that if a tensor multiplied with an index quantity give me a tensor, then that index quantity with whom I multiplied the tensor.
Yeah, but that theorem we have not proven, right? So the one is, of course, a lot of these things are related, right? It's just a question of how, in what order you prove the exercise that you want to do.
You can also write delta I as G I J.
Delta
Making a
is
contraction. You are up.
So you will
I mean, you are making a lower index to your upper index.
contracting GKGY.
but the point is that if you contract with delta ij, it doesn't raise or lower any index. Right? So you will not be able to relate this G upper IK or G lower kj by contracting with delta.
So sir, finding for a transformation of inverse, you have to multiply by its inverse, right? Some point.
Well, that's not necessary. G, if you look at the transformation law of G, right, it has a matrix form. Del x prime del x, if you think of it as a matrix, right, it's like A times G times A transpose. So G inverse will go to A inverse times G times A transpose inverse, right? You can think of it that way, and then you can calculate A inverse and A transpose inverse explicitly. And those will be the derivative, but in the opposite order. Right? Instead of getting del x of del x prime, you will get del prime of x. And that's the way you can prove this.
We have proved previously that del I G J K means normal derivative that cannot form a tensor.
Exactly.
Only that cannot form a tensor. Del I G upper J K, will it follow from this result or it is an independent result?
No, it will follow from this result because of this fact that you have to first prove that Gi is a tensor, right? Otherwise this doesn't even make sense. Okay, but assuming that you have proven that this is a tensor, it follows in the following way. The di of gjk, right? Let's write it out. So del I, this is the ordinary derivative of gjk plus gamma j I L G L K plus gamma K I L G J L. Right? These are constructed out of the first derivative solvent. Okay, so the question is what about this? So that you can use the following formula. So as a matrix, if you think of G as a matrix, this is derivative of G inverse. Right? Because G upper JK is G inverse. But this, there is a formula which tells us this is G inverse, del I G, G inverse as a matrix. Okay, any matrix, you put in the inverse of the matrix and take the derivative, then this is what you get. Okay, this is general formula. So you see that this is the G with upper IK. So del I of J inverse is again written in terms of first derivative of the metric only. Okay, so it basically means that this quantity is made out of only first derivative of the metric. Okay, and hence it must vanish. But you can explicitly check this. Right? If you take this expression, okay, calculate this using this formula. Okay, use the explicit form for gamma. Okay, you can check that this is identically zero. So exercise. Check explicitly. That di GJK. Okay, it just requires doing some algebra. Okay, because di has this piece which you where you use this, and these you can find explicitly because gammas I have given in terms of the derivative of the matrix. Is this okay? Another useful relation is this di of delta jk is 0. Okay, so let's do this explicitly. So this is del I of delta jk minus gamma ik l delta j delta gl plus gamma j l delta l. So the first is 0 because it is constant. So this gives you minus gamma l gamma jik. Right? I just said L equal to J using this product by delta. And this one gives you gamma J I K. I said L equal to K using this product. So this is 0. And these two terms you can take.
So using this we can also do that one.
Well, that's what you cannot do, right? Because you cannot use delta to raise G index of G.
No. So, as writing as delta L as product of two matrix.
This is the last expression. GI.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Yeah, then that's fine.
Yeah. For that, we have to use one more
Distribution.
expression, the distribution property. Yeah, distribution property also the contraction. I mean, you are implicitly using something which I have not proven, right? So let me write this. Let me write this. It will become clear. The point is, of course, once you become familiar with the tensor, then these are all equivalent and you don't even think about how you are getting from one step to another, right? But at the beginning, you should look at every step, right, and what follows from what. Okay, there is no well-defined rule. You can, derive various relations in various routes. Okay? But one should make sure that at every stage you use something that you have already proven earlier. Okay, so now let me write down the relation, okay, which we want. So suppose you have a tensor A, I1 to IP, J1 to J2. Okay, so this is a tensor. Now I consider another tensor, which is C, I1 to IP, M, J1 to J2, N, which is by definition A, I1 to IP, J1 to J2, delta M. This is a tensor, right? We have already proven because this is a tensor, so product of two tensors is a tensor. So now let's calculate dk of Ci1 to IPM J1 to J2M. So this is given by dk of A, I1 to IP, J1 to J2, delta N. Plus there would have been another term, but that term is 0. Because dk of delta M is appropriately 0. Now let us set here M equal to J1 and N equal to I1 on both sides. So set M equal to J1 and N equal to I1. Is okay? So left hand side, what do we get? So M is equal to J1 have set. Right? But now look at the definition here. So if you have set M, so this is J1, this is I1. Okay? That essentially tells us that these two indices are contracted. Right? On the left hand side. So we get dk of A, I1, I2, IP, I1, J2, J2. This is equal to dk of A, I1 to I2, G1 to J2, delta J1 I1. Okay?
So please repeat this.
This one? Okay. So all I have done is that I have taken set M equal to I1, sorry, M equal to J1 and N equal to I1. Okay. And I am evaluating both the left hand side and the right hand side. To evaluate the left hand side, I am using this form. Okay. I am set M equal to J1, N equal to I1. That basically means that you are just setting I1 and J1 equal and something. So that's why. So this left hand side becomes this. Here. On the right hand side, I have just written whatever was there, okay, except that I explicitly wrote M equal to I1, sorry, M equal to J1 and N equal to I1. Yeah, delta J1 I1. Yeah, so this equation, okay, under this special choice, I set M equal to J1, N equal to I1, and then automatically sum over all repeated index. Okay, and that leads me to this expression over here. This clear? So this is the relation I think probably you wanted to use. Okay. That whether you here what have I done? I have taken a tensor of rank PQ. I have contracted one index, right? So it becomes a tensor of rank P minus 1, Q minus 1. Okay. Then I took the covariant derivative. Right? So this covariant derivative acts on a tensor of rank P1 minus P minus 1, Q minus 1. Is that clear? This one is acting on a tensor of rank P minus 1, Q minus 1. Because this I1 has been contracted already, right? And you have said that this is a P minus 1, Q minus 1 rank tensor. So for example, when you expand out this covariant derivative, okay, there will be P minus 1 gammas with positive sign and Q minus 1 gammas with negative sign. Okay? On this side, this is acting on a tensor of rank PQ. Okay? So when you expand this out, there will be P gammas with positive sign and Q gammas with the negative sign. And then you have to contract with delta I1 J1. So the claim is that these two are the same. Okay? Another way of saying that whether this operation of whether you first contract and then take covariant derivative, or first take covariant derivative and then contract the index, gives the same result.
We have chosen this A to be a tensor.
Yes, exactly.
Then this decay of this right hand side quantity
Decay of this, yes.
is a tensor.
It's a tensor, yes.
And it's multiplied with another tensor which is delta J1 I1.
Yes.
And what we can see that there are indices to contract.
Yes.
So as this right hand side is a index tensor, then I just can simply do this contraction and put J1 equal to I1 in the index inside.
No, but for that you have to use the fact that the covariant derivative of this is 0 and you are taking it inside, right? That's what you use here in the reverse case. The fact that delta I1 J1 has 0 covariant derivative,
Yes.
that information is going in. Okay? So if you just write out the left hand side and the right hand side, the expressions are not manifested the same. Okay? This will have two more gammas compared to this. The claim of course is that those two gammas will cancel. This will have two more gammas, sorry, this will have two less gammas because this has a tensor of rank P minus 1, Q minus 1. Okay, I'll do this explicitly for a rank 1 tensor, it will probably become clearer. This is a tensor of rank P minus 1, Q minus 1. Okay, this is a tensor of rank PQ. So this has two more gammas compared to this. Okay. However, the claim is that once you contract, those two extra gammas cancel and this is an identity. Okay, and here you have proven it using this fact that the covariant derivative of this delta Mn is 0. Okay. But let's make this clear by considering the rank 1 case. So consider this tensor Aij. Okay. So left hand side will be dk of Aii. This is left hand side. How much is this?
dk Aij
Yes, so this is AII is a scalar, so this is ordinary derivative, no gamma factors, right? This is del K of AII. Right hand side, on the other hand, is dk of Aij delta Gi. Right? And that's what you are trying to calculate here. So let's do this. So this is del K of Aij minus gamma K JL AIL plus gamma I KL AIL and delta Gi. So this gives you, the first term gives you del K of AII. This delta Gi contract. So del K of AII. The second term, let's see, so L is set equal to J, right? Because this is delta Gi, so I is equal to L, so L is equal to J. So that's gamma J minus gamma J K.
I is equal to J.
What did I do? So J is equal to I. So gamma L Ki AIL. Gamma. Is this correct?
Yes.
Okay. J is set equal to I. Here J is set equal to I. So gamma I KL AIL plus gamma I KL ALI.
I and L are dummy, so
Yeah, so I and L are dummy index, so you can exchange I and L. Okay? So this is the same as gamma L AI AIL. Okay, and that exactly cancels this term. Okay, so you see that indeed the right hand side and left hand side are the same. Okay,
so why put the J equals to L?
Delta I.
J equal to I. Here, right? That's in this equation.
Oh, J equals to L.
J equal to I.
Okay.
This is second term, right? Gamma L Ki.
Ah.
That's what we are using, and AIL. In the last term, I put J equal to I here, so ALI. Okay, this is the content of the statement that if you take dk of AII, okay, then it doesn't matter whether you first contract and then take the covariant derivative or first take the covariant derivative and then contract. Right? Here you have first contracted, so it already has become a scalar, and you take the covariant derivative, right? So it's simple, no gammas. Whereas here you have first taken the covariant derivative and then contracted. These two operations come out. Okay? The order in which you do it doesn't matter, and it relies on the fact that delta Ij, that tensor, has vanishing covariant derivative. And this of course you can generalize also for the metric, right? Because Gij has vanishing covariant derivative. Okay? If you contract with Gij, suppose you have two lower index, okay, and you contract with G upper Ij, then whether you first contract and then take the covariant derivative, or you first take the covariant derivative and then contract, makes no difference. Okay? By the same logic that d of G is equal to 0, whether G lower index or G upper index. Is this point clear? Okay, so let me write the statement. So statement is a dk of Gij, so J1, J2 of AI1 to IP, J1, J2 to JQ is the same as J1, J2, because here we have already contracted, so it has become a rank P Q minus 2 tensor. Okay, and that's how you have to take the covariant derivative. Here you contract later, so dk of A I1 to IP, A1J to JQ. Here you have not contracted, so when you take the covariant derivative, you have to think of this as a rank PQ tensor. Okay. Again, 2 extra gammas here. But the claim is that those 2 extra gammas will again cancel, and these 2 results will be similar, will be the same. And same thing is true for lower G. Okay, who contract 2 upper index, the same.
So one result you used was that del I of G inverse is minus G inverse del I G.
Yes.
So
How do you see that? Okay. So this is true for any matrix. So the claim is that for any matrix del I of M inverse is minus M inverse del I of U M inverse. Okay, so let's try to prove this. So basically you prove this by starting with the observation that M inverse by definition is identity matrix. Okay, this is the definition of M inverse. This is identity matrix. So now you take the derivative on the left hand side. So this should be 0. Is it okay? Now let me complete it here. So this is del I M times M inverse plus M times del I M inverse. This should be 0. Right? Because the derivative distributes over the matrix. So this, now you can take this to the other side. This implies del I of M inverse is equal to minus M inverse del I of M inverse. Are there any questions? Okay, so maybe I'll stop here because I want to start something new. Okay. So tomorrow I'll introduce the notion of geodesic. Okay, let me just say in words what it is. Okay. So geodesic will essentially be a generalization of the notion of a straight line. In flat Euclidean space that you are familiar with, a straight line you define as the shortest path between 2 points. Right? Given 2 points, draw the shortest path, and that's described as a straight line. So the analog of that question in a Riemannian geometry is that if you take 2 points, you draw not necessarily the shortest path, okay, but often it can be a shortest path, but you draw what is called the extremal path, okay, between 2 points. Okay, to first order you can think of as the shortest path between 2 points in a Riemannian geometry. Okay. That is what we will call a geodesic. Okay. And we will use this as the definition of geodesic, okay, to derive some kind of differential equation that tells you the equation for a geodesic. Okay. Like for example in a straight line, in suppose you have a 2-dimensional plane, right, y versus x. Okay. A straight line you know satisfies d2y dx square equal to 0. Okay, that's a differential equation for the straight line. We will try to derive a similar differential equation for a geodesic, okay, using this definition that it's the extremal path between 2 points. But that it requires some algebra, so I will do it tomorrow. Again, you try to do all these exercises because only by doing these exercises at the beginning that you can get familiar with Riemannian geometry, right, or various identities. And once you get familiar with it, then you don't even have to think about it. Right? You apply these rules, okay, just by habit. Okay, but at the initially at least you have to know how these rules come. Okay, and for that it's important to do these exercises.